Welcome to Continuing Education Module number 3. This is Project Management Part 1, Defining the Project. This is the first in a three-part series on effective project management. Today we will learn what makes a project, benefits, development, vision, setting objectives, setting limitations, and checking your progress. To start, what makes a project? A project has a clear objective and target, unlike routine everyday activities such as answering the phone or responding to emails that are simply the means to an end. Identifying an established goal, to double sales within 6 months, for example, means it's easy to quantify whether a given project has succeeded or not. Time boundaries. A project has specific starting points and end dates, unlike a routine activity that is part of a process that has no defined completion date. It's a tool for change. A project usually aims to shake up the status quo or to respond to external changes. An effective project will have an easily identifiable and sometimes irreversible impact. Specific resources. Setting up a project demands the allocation of a chosen group of people to work on the project with a specified amount of money and resources. An element of risk. A project involves a new way of approaching things, and this constitutes an element of risk. There may be uncertainties because the project can't rely on an already successful template. For instance, it may involve people who have never worked together before. The project template. As a project manager, you will be responsible for planning projects, and it can help to kickstart the process by drawing up a list of the key components involved with every project. You will look at each one in more detail as we go forward. The project title, its start date and end date. What is the project objective? Who are the key players? What are the likely costs? What equipment or facilities may you need? And what are the likely risks? The project benefits. There are many advantages to using the tools and techniques of project management. Some of them are listed here, and we will review them, starting with encouraging greater focus on key goals. Setting up a project encourages you to concentrate on what is really important for your company. It forces you to set priorities, thus spending less time and energy on less consequential parts of the business that may be preventing you from achieving your goals. It creates a sense of urgency. A project by its nature has a specific time span, whether it be 6 weeks or 6 months. You and your team can measure exactly what you have achieved and what is left to be done by a specified deadline. Helps adapt to change. Today, more than ever, the nonprofit world is unpredictable. New trends and developments emerge rapidly, and we must be quick to respond to them. Projects provide a framework to analyze these shifts and to prepare a response that will then create more change. Saves money. Don't we all want to do this? We need to be responsible with our donor dollars. A project plan makes sure we are achieving the desired results within a projected budget. Increases control. If you underestimate the importance of a well thought out plan, you can find yourself reacting too late to change in the market or to an aggressive move by a competitor. However, if you devote time to meticulously planning a project, you will feel far more proactive. By forcing yourself to create a template for action, you will feel confident in your direction. Minimizes risks. Potential pitfalls are always lurking in business, but I have found when we work in nonprofit, we don't often see ourselves as a business. We don't see the risks in the day to day. But when you follow a project plan, it forces you to identify the risks up front and recognize the threats, whether it be to your budget or to your mission. It maximizes results. We can spend a lot of time on activities which don't get us any closer to our goals or to our mission. A project plan helps you focus on the result that you want. Effective planning helps you achieve the maximum result from any given effort. Project development. Let's look first at the project objective. It is imperative to have a firm and concise agreement as to what a project should attempt to achieve before starting any plan. Without a clear definition, a project is virtually doomed to failure from the outset. Because of its importance, it's not unusual for the definition phase to take the longest amount of time in the project management process. So we can look at who or where the project idea originated. All projects emerge from a pressing need to change or create something new. A useful first step is to identify where the idea for the project came from. What does that tell you about the project itself and its goals? Most common originators of ideas include our customers. Clients are often the main drivers for change. For instance, let's take the case of a supplier of men's casual attire. The company is asked by one of its clients, maybe a large department store, if it's considered branching out into sportswear, which they feel is their fastest growing market within the casual attire sector. For the supplier, the new clothing line will entail significant investment. It's crucial for the company to then go back to the client and find out exactly what percentage of future business they believe that sportswear is likely to represent, and if it is indeed a viable project. We also get ideas from consultants. They can also recommend major changes to organizations. Again, let's consider the clothing company. Perhaps the recommendation came from a consultant hired to analyze the company, and they recommend diversifying their product line to include sportswear. The project manager should evaluate the viability of the consultant's finding by gauging their main clients, for instance, the department store's interest in sportswear. Sometimes ideas come from senior management, or perhaps even the board of directors. What analysis was done to make that suggestion, though? The project manager better find out and evaluate the idea. If you move forward with the idea, the member or members of senior management supporting that idea may be referred to as the project champions. And finally, the project manager. That's you. What if it's your idea? In this case, the onus to sell the project to others is on you. The individuals who will be interested in the project, commonly known as our stakeholders, may include clients, customers, senior management, suppliers, consultants, maybe in our case, even politicians and government. It's up to you to get them on board. Project review. This is the chance to gather management and client opinions. Seek feedback from as many different sources as possible. Find your devil's advocate. Deliberately approach the most negative person or people in your organization, especially if you're keen on the project. Fact finders and nitpickers are very useful as devil's advocates and for underlining all the pitfalls in a project. Try to be as neutral as possible so people don't feel like you're trying to sway them one way or the other. Put the project into context. It's important to find out about all existing and potential projects in an organization to gauge how your project fits in. Putting your project into the broader context is a test about how urgent and significant your particular project is. You may ask yourself the following questions. How does it fit in with the organization's long-term goals? Its mission? How much overall funding exists for this new venture? Are funds available for the project? If not, how will I find funding for it? Is the timing right? Could this project wait until others are completed? And finally, weighing the pros and cons. By this stage and through the feedback you've received, you should have enough information to create a list of the driving forces, the pros, versus the resisting forces, the cons. It's useful to grade the different forces to see which side scores higher. If there's no obvious winner, it may make you go out and seek further information or to enlist help from someone else, a new opinion on the weight of each of the pros and cons. Defining the vision. Assuming that you've decided that the original idea has potential and is feasible to become a major project, now you can come up with an overall statement that summarizes the vision of the project. This is a good time to involve the key players informally in the process and invite their feedback. Once this is in place, arrange a meeting with all the key players and ask for their comments so you can fine tune the summary where necessary. By making sure that the objectives of most participants are satisfied, you guarantee their continued commitment to the project. So when we define the vision, we're going to include again the project title and date. Who will play a central role in the project? Name them. If you actually have their first and last names, put that in your project detail. Otherwise, you can just list what their role title might be. What does the organization want to change and how? Why is it important? What will the project achieve? How soon should the project be implemented? And finally, what is the mission statement for the project? This should be no more than 2 sentences. Setting the objectives. When all participants have agreed on a general vision of the project, it is time to set objectives that will help to make that vision a reality. Why setting objectives is important? Let's think about our targets. Set targets can spur the company into action by motivating the team members. It gives us a sense of purpose. Objectives create a sense of direction as they focus on achieving goals. And prioritization. Objectives force the team to prioritize and organize their work. SMART objectives. The essential characteristic of objectives is to be smart. Now you'll find other words for these letters, which these letters can stand for, but for our purposes today, we are going to define SMART as specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, and time sensitive. Specific. You don't want to just increase sales. That's too vague. You want to gain X% of the sportswear market within 18 months, and that will represent X% of the overall revenue. Now, replace X with an actual number. You want to gain 20% of the sportswear market within 18 months, and that will represent a 36% of overall revenue. Measurable. This is key. You want to be able to measure the objective's success, whether it's in 8 weeks or 8 months. For that, you have to have a list of the indicators. For instance, comparing sales figures for the new sportswear line for the first 3 months with the sales figures from the same quarter a year later. Aggressive. It's an excellent word for A. Setting up a project is an aggressive move. It is fitting that the targets should be just as ambitious. Realistic. Targets should be appropriate to the investment available, the overall market scenario, and the capabilities of staff. Unrealistic goals will demotivate staff. I knew a small nonprofit that each year budgeted a fundraising target of $1 million, despite never having raised more than $350,000 and having a trend in the opposite direction. Each year, the fundraising staff and its volunteers were made to feel responsible for not meeting that target and preventing the organization from achieving their program goals. You don't want to do that. You want realistic goals so your team can celebrate the accomplishments and push to greater future wins. Time sensitive. Set check-in points to measure what's been achieved and how much is left to accomplish. This will again give you small accomplishments to celebrate. It helps to mitigate risk and creates a sense of urgency if the timeline begins to slip. Setting limitations. Time constraints. It's important to identify who is setting the time limit for the project and how much scope there is for shifting the time frames if needed. Budget constraints. You want to deliver a quality project, but you have limited resources. Develop the project with the budget expectations in mind. Structural constraints. You have to take into account the opinions of people in the company who are not embracing the idea and be prepared to make some compromises if necessary. And risks. There are many potential external factors beyond your control, but you should think about them. It could be a sudden market crash, a natural disaster, or, as we've seen, an unexpected pandemic. What if they happen? What can you do to mitigate risk or work with it? How will this project evolve in a worst case scenario? I tend to be all over the risks and routinely develop a worst case scenario budget for the year so I know what could or couldn't happen if we were to lose, for instance, our major funder. Or what if we can't hold that special event? Where might I end up looking in that case for alternative revenue? Checking your progress. Now we're going to return to the original template on slide number 4. If you should now be able to answer these questions in far greater detail. What is the project objective? Who had the idea originally and what has your communication with them been? How have you communicated the idea to your team members? What is the main vision and do the key players agree? List 1 to 3 main project objectives. Make sure they're measurable. Who are the key players? Who's the project sponsor or champion? Who is essential that you have on your team? What support do you need? What are the likely costs? When do you anticipate expenses? Are they all up front or are they spread out throughout the project timeline? Where will the money come from? What are the contingencies should the unthinkable happen? Equipment and facilities. Do you need anything new? Have you included that in your budget or in the plan? Should you be looking for donations? And if looking for donations, how will that affect the timeline? And what happens if you can't find them? How does that change the timeline? And how will that make the team feel? What are the likely risks? And how can they be avoided or overcome? Have you considered them in your budget contingencies or in your timeline? Now, the fun part, the checklist. On your checklist, you should be able to, as you go through your project, check off each one of these. Know your objectives and list them in the order of importance. Check. Make sure the majority of key players agree with the objectives. Check. Pinpoint all of the risks involved in the project and set a realistic time frame for the project. Check, check. Address all necessary issues before giving the project a go-ahead. Assess where your project falls in the greater scheme of things. Be prepared for the project to change as it develops. Check, check, check. And finally, prepare a contingency plan. Check. We've now completed defining the project, the first part of our project management continuing education module. I hope you'll join us back here for part 2.